In 2007, Steve Jobs stood on stage and unveiled a device that would change the world forever. But what most people don't know is that the iPhone almost didn't happen. Wireless carriers hated it, engineers thought it was impossible, and even Apple's own team doubted its success. This is the untold story of how the iPhone defied all odds to become the most influential piece of technology in modern history. Imagine trying to write an email by pressing a button 3 times just to get the right letter. Before 2007, mobile phones felt like solving a puzzle every time you wanted to use them. They were bulky, slow, and genuinely frustrating devices that made even basic tasks needlessly complicated. Physical keyboards dominated every major phone design, yet browsing the internet was a painful experience on screens barely larger than a postage stamp. You had to scroll sideways just to read a full sentence. And most websites weren't even built for mobile viewing. Companies like BlackBerry and Nokia built their entire reputation on physical keys, and the idea of removing them seemed unthinkable. The IBM Simon had shown early promise back in the 90s with its touchscreen and basic apps, but it remained a niche product, too expensive and too far ahead of its time to catch on. Even stylish phones like the Motorola Star TAC, which flipped open like something from a sci-fi movie, were functionally limited. They could make calls and send messages, but that was about it. The entire mobile market was stuck in a cycle of incremental upgrades, slightly better cameras, slightly smaller designs, but no real innovation. Consumers were growing restless, and carriers were content with locking people into long contracts for devices that all essentially did the same things. The industry was ripe for disruption, but no one inside it was willing to take the risk. Apple saw the gap everyone else missed. While other companies were competing to make better keyboards or slimmer flip phones, Apple questioned whether keyboards were even necessary. They recognized that the real barrier wasn't hardware, it was imagination. The mobile world was cluttered with compromises, and that created an opportunity. Then came the team crazy enough to try something completely different. What if the most important design choice was actually about removing something rather than adding it? That was the radical idea Apple's team presented, a phone with no physical keyboard at all. Engineers inside the company immediately raised concerns. They doubted whether a touchscreen could ever be accurate enough for typing or durable enough for daily use. Skeptics argued that people needed the tactile feedback of real keys to type quickly and confidently. Carriers shared those doubts, worrying that customers would reject a device without the familiar keyboard layout they had come to expect. They feared returns, negative reviews, and a product that simply wouldn't sell. Steve Jobs pushed back hard. He believed the future was in multi-touch technology, a screen that could interpret multiple finger gestures at once, like pinching to zoom or swiping to scroll. He argued that physical keys were a limitation, not a benefit. They took up space, added bulk, and restricted what the device could become. In place of buttons, the team developed a software-based keyboard that could appear only when needed, freeing the entire front face of the device for display. Early prototypes reinforced the skepticism. Some used iPod click wheels for navigation. Others had plastic screens that scratched easily. When images and details of these test models leaked online, tech blogs and forums lit up with doubt. Commenters called the design unrealistic, and competitors privately dismissed it as a fantasy. The entire project depended on perfecting capacitive touch technology, something no consumer device had yet mastered. The engineering challenge was immense. The team needed a glass screen that wouldn't crack, a responsive surface that registered light touches, and software that could interpret gestures without lag. They tested hundreds of prototypes, often working late into the night to refine the sensitivity of the touch layer. Failure was frequent, but with each iteration, the potential became clearer. Eventually, they proved that keyboards weren't essential. They were a crutch. A well-designed touch interface could not only match physical keys but surpass them in flexibility. But convincing Apple's own engineers was one thing. Persuading the wireless carriers, companies that controlled access to the market, was an entirely different challenge. Steve Jobs walked into a meeting with telecom executives and came out with a deal that would reshape the industry. But it wasn't an easy sell. Carriers were used to controlling every aspect of the phones on their networks, from the software to the preloaded apps. Apple wanted full control over the iPhone's design, interface, and user experience. They even demanded a share of the monthly service revenue, something no handset maker had ever asked for before. AT&T, then known as Singular Wireless, initially refused. The company's executives balked at the idea of giving up their authority. They worried about security, support, and the risks of an unproven device. Revenue sharing was especially contentious. Carriers were accustomed to keeping all subscription profits. No manufacturer had ever negotiated such terms. To break the stalemate, Jobs arranged a private demonstration. In a secure room, he showed a small group of AT&T leaders a working prototype of the iPhone. He demonstrated the touch interface, the visual voicemail, in the full web browser. The executives were stunned. They had never seen a phone respond so smoothly or look so modern. The demo made it clear this wasn't just another device, it was a leap forward. Negotiations intensified after that. Internal documents from the time show that both sides made compromises. Apple agreed to certain network requirements and dropped their demand for a full revenue share in exchange for exclusivity. AT&T, in turn, accepted Apple's software control and agreed to heavily subsidize the iPhone's cost to consumers. The carrier saw an opportunity to distinguish itself from competitors and attract high-value customers. The iPhone's exclusivity became Apple's strongest bargaining chip. By offering the device only through AT&T, they gave the carrier a major advantage in a crowded market. That exclusivity helped justify the risks AT&T was taking. In the end, the carrier decided to bet on the future, hoping the iPhone would drive subscriber growth and data usage. The partnership was officially sealed in early 2007, just months before the planned launch. Now came the real test, introducing the iPhone to the world. The first iPhone sold out within hours of going on sale, but not everyone was convinced it would last. When Steve Jobs unveiled the device in January 2007, the audience responded first with silence, then with roaring applause. Many in the room had never seen a phone that looked or worked like this before. It was sleek, buttonless, and operated entirely through touch. Critics were quick to voice their doubts. Some called the iPhone overpriced at $499, arguing that few consumers would pay that much for a phone. Others questioned the practicality of a touchscreen keyboard. BlackBerry's co-CEO Jim Balsillie publicly stated that Apple's entry into the market would not affect his company's strong position. He believed physical keyboards were essential for serious communication, and that the iPhone was more of a luxury item than a practical tool. Despite the criticism, early adopters lined up for blocks outside Apple stores days before the official launch. People camped out overnight, drawn by the promise of a device that could combine a phone, an iPod, and an internet communicator in one. They were willing to pay the high price for something that felt genuinely new. Sales figures quickly contradicted the skeptics. Apple sold 270,000 iPhones in the first 30 hours alone. By the end of 2007, the company had moved 6 million units, far exceeding internal and external expectations. The device wasn't just selling, it was creating a new category of product. A year later, Apple released the iPhone 3G at a lower price point with support for faster data networks. This move dramatically expanded its audience. The App Store launched alongside it, allowing third-party developers to create software for the platform. Demand exploded. Lines grew longer, and sales surged as the iPhone became more accessible and more capable. Apple had proven its skeptics wrong. The company didn't just enter the mobile market, it redefined it. Competitors scrambled to develop touchscreen phones of their own, but none could match the iPhone's integration of hardware and software. The ripples of that first launch were only beginning to spread. The iPhone didn't just succeed, it rewrote the entire playbook. Before 2007, phones followed strict formulas. Afterward, every device had to adapt or disappear. 15 years later, we're still living in the world it created.